If you enjoy true mysteries, please subscribe. Joyita was a 69-foot wooden ship found drifting, and all of the 25 passengers and crew had mysteriously disappeared. Built as a luxury yacht for movie director Roland West, he named the ship for his wife, actress Jewel Carmen Joyita, in Spanish meaning Little Jewel, in 1941, 2 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Joyita was acquired by the United States Navy and taken to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, where she was outfitted as a patrol boat. The Navy used her to patrol the Big Island of Hawaii until the end of World War II. Then she was sold and Captain Miller was hired, a British-born sailor living in Samoa. Miller used the ship as a trading and fishing charter boat. The boat had been scheduled to leave on October 2nd, but her departure was delayed because her port engine had problems. On October 3, 1955, Joyita finally left Samoa's harbor, but on only one engine, bound for the Tokelau Islands, about 270 miles away. She was carrying 16 crew members and 9 passengers, including a government official, a doctor on his way to perform a surgery. The voyage was expected to take between 41 and 48 hours. Joyita was scheduled to arrive in the Tokelau Islands on October 5th. On October 6th, a message from port reported that the ship was overdue. No ship or land-based radio operator reported receiving any distress signal from the ship. A search and rescue mission was launched, and for 7 days, the Royal New Zealand Air Force covered an area of nearly 100,000 square miles, but no sign of Joyita or any of her passengers or crew was found. 5 weeks later, on November 10th, a captain of a merchant ship sighted Joyita. She had drifted more than 600 miles west from her scheduled route. There was no trace of any of the passengers or crew, and 4 tons of cargo was also missing. Barnacle growth high above the waterline on the port side showed that Joyita had been listing heavily for a while. Joyita also carried a dinghy and 3 lifeboats, and all were missing. She did not carry enough life jackets for everyone on board. The extreme buoyancy of the ship made sinking impossible, so investigators were confused why the crew had not stayed on board and just waited for help. The starboard engine was found to be covered by mattresses, while the port engine's clutch was still partially disassembled, showing that the vessel was still running on only one engine. A spare pump had been rigged in the engine room, however it had not been connected. The radio on board was tuned to the International Distress Channel. However, when the equipment was inspected, a break in the cable between the radio and the aerial was found. That cable had been painted over, covering the break, and this would have limited the range of the radio to only 2 miles. The electric clocks on board wired into the vessel's generator had stopped soon after 10 p.m., and the switches for the cabin lighting and navigation lights were on, implying that whatever had occurred happened at night. The ship's logbook, sextant, mechanical chronometer, and other navigational equipment, as well as the gun Mr. Miller kept in the boat, were missing. A doctor's bag was found on deck, containing a stethoscope, a scalpel, and 4 lengths of blood-stained bandages. There was still fuel in Joyita's tanks. From the amount used, it was calculated she had traveled 243 miles before the vessel was abandoned. Although her bilges and lower decks were flooded, her hull was good, and once the water was pumped out, she floated well and was easily towed into port. Investigators heard the sound of water entering the vessel. It was found that a pipe in the water circuit of the engine's cooling system had failed, allowing water in. The first the crew would have known about the leak was when the water was above the engine room floorboards, by which time it would have been nearly impossible to locate the leak. Also, the bilge pumps were not fitted with strainers and had become clogged with debris, meaning that it would have been very difficult to pump the water out. A formal inquiry into the fate of Joyita was held in 1956. It found that the fate of the missing passengers and crew was inexplicable on the evidence submitted at the inquiry. An especially strange point was that the 3 lifeboats Joyita carried were missing. It would not make sense for the crew and passengers to voluntarily abandon a boat that could not sink. The ship had 640 cubic feet of cork lining her holds, making her virtually unsinkable. The inquiry was able to establish only the reasons for the vessel becoming flooded, but not the disappearance of everybody on board. It found that the vessel would have begun to flood due to the fractured cooling pipe. The bilge pumps were no use due to becoming blocked. Joyita lacked watertight bulkheads, so the water would have gradually flooded the lower decks. As the boat began to sink lower into the water, the one remaining engine would not have been able to maintain enough speed to steer. While flooded to a level that would sink a normal ship, Joyita stayed floating due to her cork-lined hull. The inquiry also placed much of the responsibility for the events on Captain Miller. They found him reckless for setting out on an ocean-going voyage with only one engine and numerous minor faults, and negligent for failing to provide a working radio. Given the fact that the hull of Joyita was sound and her design made her almost unsinkable, investigators wonder why the passengers and crew did not stay on board. One theory suggests the captain was injured as they found the blood-stained bandages. Miller was well aware of the vessel's ability to stay afloat. Without him to reassure the other people on board, they may have panicked when Joyita began to flood and taken to the lifeboats. However, this in itself would not account for the missing cargo and equipment unless the vessel had been found abandoned and had her cargo removed. A friend of Miller was convinced that Miller would never have left Joyita alive, given his knowledge of her construction. He was aware of tension between Miller and his American first mate, Chuck Simpson. He felt that their mutual dislike for each other came to blows, and both men fell overboard or were severely injured in a struggle. This left the vessel without an experienced captain, and would explain why those remaining on board would panic when the ship began to flood. Some people suggest Japanese involvement. There was still strong anti-Japanese sentiment in parts of the Pacific. In Fiji, there was resentment of Japan being allowed to operate fishing fleets in local waters. The Fiji Times and Herald quoted that Joyita had passed through a fleet of Japanese fishing boats during its trip and had observed something the Japanese did not want them to see. Such theories gained credence when men clearing Joyita found a knife stamped "Made in Japan." However, tests on the knife proved negative, possibly left on board from when Joyita was used for fishing in late 1940. There was an idea that the ship's occupants were kidnapped by a Soviet submarine, with the world at the time in the midst of the growing Cold War. Some suggest that modern sea pirates attacked the vessel, killed the 25 passengers and crew, thrown their bodies into the ocean, and stole the missing 4 tons of cargo. It was also revealed that Miller had large debts after a series of unsuccessful fishing trips, but it is unlikely to be insurance fraud, given she was almost impossible to sink. Also, Miller was relying on Joyita being chartered for regular runs between Samoa and Tokelau. These government charters would have quickly cleared his debts. A subsequent owner of Joyita, British author Robin Maugham, spent many years investigating the vessel's past. He published his findings in his book, which raised several key points from his investigation. He agreed that events were started by the flooding from the broken cooling pipe and the failure of the pumps. The mattresses found covering the starboard engine were used to protect the electrical switchboard from spray kicked up by the engine's flywheel as the water level rose. Captain Miller, knowing Joyita to be unsinkable and desperate to reach his destination to clear his debt, pressed on. However, Simpson and possibly other crew members demanded that he turn back. This effectively led to mutiny, and Miller and the crew fought, during which Miller sustained a serious injury. By now the ship was entering heavier weather, with winds around 40 miles per hour, and with one engine and a flooded bilge, she was beginning to struggle. The flooding in the engine room would have eventually caused the starboard engine to fail, also cutting all the vessel's electrical power. Simpson was now in control and made the decision to abandon ship, taking the navigational equipment, logbook, and supplies, as well as the injured Miller, with them. It still seems unlikely, though, that Simpson would choose to abandon a flooded but floating ship to take to small open rafts in the Pacific Ocean. Maybe they sighted a nearby island or reef and tried to reach it, but in the strong winds and seas the rafts were carried out to sea, leaving Joyita drifting and empty. In 1956, Joyita was sold to Mr. David Simpson, but in 1959, Joyita ran aground on a reef. She floated off the reef assisted by high tide, but while heading for port began to take in water through a split seam. Now, with a reputation as an unlucky ship, and with a damaged hull, she was abandoned by her owners. She was stripped of useful equipment and is disintegrating slowly, piece by piece, until little is left of her. In 1975, the Western Samoa Post Office released a set of 5 stamps covering the mystery of Joyita. In 2012, a stone in honor of the ship was erected in Tokelau. As of 2025, all aboard are still declared as missing. What do you think happened? Let me know in the comments. If you want more real-life true mysteries, please subscribe, because sometimes the truth can be stranger than fiction. New tales every Thursday night. Subscribe if you dare.